The manner in which we question children and the design and construct of our questions is extremely important in forensic interviewing. This presentation is called the process of inquiry. The focus is on question types and how to utilize them and what sequence a forensic interviewer should use when questioning children. As Professor Walker points out, we do not question children, we question one child at a time. Now that quote in part speaks to the fact that there is significant variability among children. It is not one size fits all, but each child has their own strengths and weaknesses, and a good forensic interviewer is always mindful of that fact. This is a chart that speaks to the general sequence and question types, which we call the process of inquiry. The ideal type of question is over here on the left. It's called free recall. A question that calls for free recall is the least suggestive kind of questioning and results in the most reliable responses. Free recall is a type of indirect questioning, and the expected verbal response or outcome of a free recall question is a narrative. That is, the child explains and responds in a narrative in their own words. Some people have analogized the process of inquiry as a sort of funnel. That is, if you think of the top part of a funnel, it is wide and open-ended, just like a free recall question. And as we move down within the funnel becomes narrower and the questions become a little bit more direct. And you can see on the one side we have the indirect kinds of questions, and on the other side, the right side of this chart, we have the direct kinds of questions. The next question type is focused recall. The expected response is a focused narrative, a narrative that the child produces, yet we help the child by focusing them on the kind of issue or area that we are concerned about. The next question type is multiple choice. Multiple choice results in a selected response. That is, you give the child a group of options, a group of responses, and the child selects the one that is correct. Multiple choice questions are very common, yet they can be dangerous at times because unless they are asked correctly, multiple choice questions can be closed-ended and the child does not have an option other than the options the questioner provides. And because children want to please the adult, because children believe that the adult may know the answer or be better at understanding the past event, the child may select from among the multiple choice options a response that is not entirely accurate. That's why we want to avoid multiple choice questions that are closed-ended or forced choice. And the way to do that is to ask at the end of every multiple choice question or something else. Was it big or small or something else? Was he wearing a jacket, a sweater, a t-shirt, or something else? By asking questions in that manner, we are giving the child an escape, an option out, where they can say, forensic questioner, the options you gave me did not contain an accurate response. The next kind of questioning that we might ask in a forensic interview as we move down into the funnel, as the questions become more direct, is a yes or no question. You can see these kinds of questions are very direct, and they can be highly suggestive. The response is limited. The child is not doing the talking, the interviewer is doing the talking. Thus, the outcome is limited and selected by the interviewer. The most dangerous kinds of questions are those that we characterize as misleading. Misleading. They're very direct and erroneous. They contain information that's inaccurate, and they can be misleading. The outcome, the expected verbal response, is that which is suggested by the interviewer. Let's take a look at the process of inquiry with some concrete examples of the different question types. The process of inquiry involving free recall questions, where the expected verbal response is a narrative, includes these kinds of questions. Tell me about yourself. Tell me all about, and you mention a topic the child introduced. Tell me all about Poppy getting fresh with you in the back of the truck. Tell me everything you remember about Poppy getting fresh with you in the back of the truck. If the child provides a narrative and then stops, a question such as, then what, is another form of free recall question. Or, what happened next? Another example of a free recall question. Examples of focused recall, which call for focused or focused narrative types of responses. One example is the focused topic. You said it happened in the blue house and in the car. Tell me all about the blue house. Again, this is what we call focused recall. And the child introduced the subject, blue house and the car, two types of subjects. You focus the recall on the area or issue that you are interested in. Tell me all about the blue house would be a focused recall. A very open-ended kind of question and an excellent kind of question. Focused recall can also be designed to seek details. Details like who, what, where, when, and how did something happen. So if Daniela explains about the time in the back of the truck and then says that there was a time where he did some other sexual act that was different, you might ask, well, where did the time that he put his mouth on your butt happen? So we are not completely open-ended, yet we are, again, allowing the child to provide a narrative with a little bit of focus about an issue that's relevant to our inquiry. For example, where did it happen? Or how did it happen? Where was he when he was putting his mouth on your butt? These kinds of focused recall questions seek details. Another example of focused recall involves seeking clarification. You said she made you have sex. What does sex mean? Or rather, what does have sex mean? In my example earlier, Danielle says that he got fresh with her in the back of the truck. So your question in a focused recall type of questioning would be something like, you said Grandpapa got fresh with you in the back of the truck. What does got fresh mean? What did Grandpa do when he was getting fresh? Another example might be, you said that Grandpa touched you on your butt in the back of the truck. What part of his body did he touch you with in the back of the truck? You see how that is a focused recall question that seeks clarification and or details. The next kind of question in the process of inquiry is the multiple choice question. Here, the expected outcome is a selected response. And as I indicated earlier, the interviewer provides options. Do you live in an apartment or a house or some other place? You see, we provided options: apartment, house, and the open-ended or something else or some other place. This is how we avoid forced choice questions. Multiple choice questions are okay. They tend to be overused by forensic interviewers, primarily because the interviewer isn't patient. One has to let the child process the question, think about it, and then respond. Nevertheless, in many cases, multiple choice questions may be appropriate. It is critical, however, that they are not forced choice questions where the child has to pick one of your options. Instead, we recommend at the end of the question saying, or some other place, or something else, or someone else. There are a few natural exceptions. Did that happen one time or more than one time? Or are you a boy or are you a girl? Those are examples where the only options that there could possibly be are within the multiple choice question. Of course, we always want to be mindful of what's called response bias, and that occurs sometimes when the questioner cues the child or questions the child in a way that makes the child believe that the interviewer wants the child to select one response over the other. For example, if the interviewer says, "Did you let him have sex with you, or did you try to get away?" Now, the way that question is constructed, it communicates to the child that the morally right thing to do was to try to get away, when that may not have been safe nor appropriate under the scenario. But the way I constructed that question, especially as a forced choice question, and also by posing the moral quandary, did you let him touch you on your body, or did you let him have sex with you, which makes the child feel complicit. The only morally correct response is that I tried to get away, and the child may select that even if in fact it did not occur. So we want to be aware of response bias questions. Continuing on the process of inquiry, the next kind of questioning is called yes or no questioning, and the expected outcome is limited selected response. This is the most direct question type. You need to avoid assumptions. A better sequence would be, do you go to school? Yes. Tell me about school. Not, tell me about school, when the child has never said that they go to school. You should avoid yes/no questions. Rarely are they an appropriate form of questioning. Sometimes they might be, but again, you must avoid them, and as always, be aware of possible response bias. Next, we have the very dangerous kinds of questions called misleading. Here the response is suggested by the interviewer. A misleading question, or a leading question, is a question that, to one degree or another, suggests that the questioner is looking for a particular answer. Did he have a flashlight in his hand? Would be a leading question. It suggests an answer. Did he have something in his hand? Would not be leading. Again, a leading question suggests that the questioner is looking for a particular answer. Usually, misleading questions arise because the interviewer makes assumptions about the child, about the events the child experienced, and we must avoid making assumptions. Even something like this. This stuff is hard to talk about, isn't it? That's a tag question too. We call that a tag question because at the end, the part "isn't it" is a tag that the interviewer appends or attaches to a statement, right? This stuff is hard to talk about. The interviewer is making a statement and then asking the child to agree. Isn't it true that your brother put his penis in your mouth? Well, that is a very misleading question. It makes a statement to the child and asks whether it's true or not. It's just another version of a tag question. It makes a statement and seeks the child's agreement. More examples of what are characterized as assumptive questions. Where in your house did that happen? When the child hasn't said it happened at your house. They should say at your house. And there, through the magic of video recording, I've corrected that. Again, the point here is you're making an assumption and you're feeding that assumptive information to the child. More examples of misleading questions where the response is suggested by the interviewer include questions that introduce facts that the interviewer believes to be false, or intentionally tricking children. When Sam Stone got that bear dirty, did he do it on purpose or was it an accident? Was Sam Stone happy or sad that he got the bear dirty? Now, this is not only misleading, it's a forced multiple choice question. It makes an assumption about Sam Stone's emotions. And this question here, when Sam Stone got that bear dirty, that's directly from the CC study about Sam Stone and stereotype induction. But those kinds of questions were used because Professor CC was measuring the impact of this type of poor questioning. Again, you want to avoid misleading questions. Now, I've gone back to the process of inquiry chart. And one thing I didn't mention when I went over the types of questions, and on the bottom here, the types of verbal responses that are expected. In the middle here are age, ability, and emotional trauma. And these are what we call enhancers and diminishers. Enhancers and diminishers. What do I mean by that? Well, enhancers are things that make the child better able to handle the questions, better able to respond to the more open-ended questions, better able to provide a free narrative without focus and help from the interviewer. Enhancers include age and ability. We should be able to use more open-ended questions with older children and more advanced children. You know, some children are just a little bit more advanced. They're a little bit more cognitively developed than other children. There are 7-year-olds and there are 7-year-olds. Some kids at age 7 are not as able to handle questions as others. They may catch up a little bit later as they grow older. So their ability, their natural ability, influences whether they're able to handle open-ended questions. And there is generally a relationship between age and ability. So generally speaking, when they're older, they should be able to handle open-ended questions. Now, age and ability can be a diminisher if they're especially young or they're a child who has a learning disability or are a little bit slow. Emotional trauma can be a diminisher, where children present with emotional trauma or have a tough time repeating these difficult facts from their abuse. Even though they might be older and more able, the emotional trauma could act as a diminisher, and we may need to use more direct questions with children who present with emotional trauma. Here are some process of inquiry caveats, or things to think about. Ideally, you want your questions to invite narratives. You want to recognize that the process of inquiry is a process. It's not a continuum. You don't do A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D. You choose the questions based upon the responses. If you do have to use a direct question, you follow with indirect recall questions. For example, if in a prior statement the child had indicated that she had been fondled by her grandfather in the back of the truck, but she never offers that to you. She only talks about the time that Grandpa used to have sexual contact with her in her bedroom. Sometimes you might need to ask a direct question or yes or no question. For example, did Grandpa touch you on your private parts in some place different from your bedroom? The child says, I don't know, or I don't remember, or something like that. You might say to the child, did Grandpa have an old truck in the back of the house? Yes. Did you ever go in that truck with Grandpa? Yes, he took me in there once. Tell me all about the time Grandpa took you in the truck. You see, I asked some suggestive, some direct questions about a topic the child didn't introduce. I had an articulable basis for doing it because the child had told Child Protection that other sexual molestation occurred in Grandpa's truck. So I introduced the concept of the truck. I, the interviewer, also introduced that Grandpa went into the truck with the child. I asked some direct questions, some questions that might be characterized as undesirable, but I have an articulable basis for doing it because we know that the child had made a prior statement about that truck. Once the child provided a response that they were indeed in the truck alone with Grandpa, I asked a wide open, free recall, open-ended question. Follow direct questions with indirect recall questions. Don't let the child's age dictate your question types. Let the child's competence and abilities drive your question types. And you will learn that during the rapport building process. In fact, throughout the interview, you will learn that child's abilities. Here are some things to avoid. Prefix questions. Professor Walker calls them DUR questions. Do you remember? Can you tell me? These prefix questions add nothing to the inquiry. They're what we call surplusage or baggage. And they're problematic because they give the child an out to say that they do not remember because they may not like talking about this subject matter, or they may not want to get someone in trouble, or all of the reasons why children who are interviewed about molestation are avoidant. Do you remember allows them an out. And the process of remembering is complex. They may remember parts of it or some of it, and it doesn't add any value. Every question in the world that you ask with do you remember as a prefix, you can ask it better by excising, by removing the do you remember part. Do you remember being in the truck? Were you in the truck? Do you remember going to the ice cream parlor? Did you go to the ice cream parlor? Can you tell me is very similar, and you need to avoid that. Other things to avoid. Coercive statements. Now, nobody wants to coerce children. Nobody wants to out and out bribe children. But sometimes a good interviewer might say, well, if you tell me what your dad did, then we can go to McDonald's. Not good. A form of coercion, a form of bribery which is problematic, as you might expect. This interview isn't over until you tell me what happened. Now, one might say it bluntly, or one might say it indirectly, so you have to be careful. Can I go now? Well, I just need you to answer a few more questions. Well, that's another way of saying this interview isn't over until you tell me what happened. Now, you might say, well, we're going to be leaving in a few minutes, and I'm curious about what happened in the truck. You know, that is qualitatively different than You can leave in a few minutes once you answer these questions. It's all about the way we formulate our questions, and threats are not always overt and direct, like this example. Watch these kind of pressuring statements too. Even "can you help me?" Avoid that. "I need you to." These are ways to pressure children. You want to avoid that. Some final notes, some things to think about. The best way to get better at it being a forensic interviewer is to watch your interviews. That's a great thing about forensic interviews in the modern era. We record our interviews and we can watch them and we can learn from our past interviews. Take an interview that you did and categorize your questions, just as we did in this process of inquiry. It will help you improve your skills and you'll be better at using what you've learned in your courtroom testimony. Have your colleagues watch your interviews. Another way to get better is through peer review, and that is sharing your forensic interviews, the interviews that you do, with your colleagues, and this way they can help you understand how you did things well and how you might have done things differently. One way to think about all of this process of inquiry stuff is to think about who's doing the talking. If you want to identify the better question types versus the not so good question types, identify who's doing most of the talking. If the interviewer is doing most of the talking and the child's doing very little of the talking, you're using poor question types. On the other hand, if the interviewer is doing a little bit of talking and the child is doing a lot of talking, then you're probably using good question types. The goal here is to encourage the child to provide a narrative. The interviewer is merely a facilitator, someone who provides the linguistic prompts for the child to express themselves about the past event. Let's take a look at some question examples and think about them before I give you my understanding of what kind of question it is. What happened that time in the truck? What kind of question do you think that is? If you said focused recall, I think you're correct. It's not a completely free recall question. It provides some information, but it calls for time and place. It focuses the child on the truck and what may have happened in the truck. Number two, I know someone touched you. Who did that? What kind of question do you think that is? That's right. You said misleading question. It is a misleading question with a tag. A misleading question almost always can be discerned by looking at the statement that's made. Misleading questions are statements where we try to get the child to agree with us. I know someone touched you is a statement. Who did that is the tag that seeks agreement. Obviously a bad question, a misleading question, a question that's based upon an assumption that you have no basis for. Did your mom hurt you? What do you think? That would be a leading question. It suggests an answer, doesn't it? It suggests that mom hurt the child. Now, depending upon the context of the inquiry, that question might be okay. Nevertheless, looking at it right here, did your mom hurt you? It's leading and suggestive. Number four, what happened? What kind of question do you think that is? Excellent. Well done. What happened is a free recall question. That's as good a question as you can ask, right? Does not provide any information. It prompts the child to give us a narrative. She licked your pee-pee, didn't she? What do you think? Good question? Nah, that's not a good question. That's number two again, right? Somebody's making a statement. She licked your pee-pee, and it has the tag, didn't she? Bad question. Misleading question. question that makes an assumption, question that gives the child an answer, and ask the child to agree or disagree. Number 6, was it your mom, your stepmom, or someone else? What kind of question is that? Well, that's an easy one, right? That's a multiple choice question. Now, is it a forced choice question or an open-ended multiple choice question? Correct. It's an open-ended multiple choice question, and it has this wonderful ending that we strongly encourage, or someone else. If we simply said, was it your mom or your stepmom, that would be a forced choice question. What about the last one here? I understand that your uncle touched your private. Tell me about that. Well, that's what you call an assumptive question, right? We talked about that at the end there. That is a kind of suggestive and misleading question. Again, it all depends upon context. The word understand suggests to me that the interviewer learned this from some source other than the child. Maybe from the CPS report, the police report, or some other person. Now, depending upon the context and what exactly is going on in the interview, sometimes you may need to repeat something that the child said to a third party. But you need to be clear about that. As it stands, although you might want to say, tell me about that, well, that seems to be open-ended. But here it's just a tag, right? I understand your uncle touched your private is a statement. No different than number 5, she licked your pee-pee. Or number 2, I know someone touched you. Right? I understand your uncle touched your private. It's a little bit softer, but it is suggestive nonetheless. Now, if the child said, and then my uncle took me in the back of the ice cream parlor and touched my private, a question like number 7 might be okay. Okay, Daniela, you told me your uncle touched your private in the back of the ice cream store. Tell me about that. Well, that would be different, obviously, based upon the context. Okay? This was the process of inquiry.